Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Rachel. So what I'd like to do is, in the 20 minutes, give a few-minute introduction to the work that we've done with Runa, a bit of my story as a college student starting a social enterprise, and then spend some time getting into the nuts and bolts, the cut to the chase. So talk about 3 core areas where we've tried to focus our time, a lot of mistakes that we've made, some lessons that we've learned, and hopefully some useful advice for some of you in different stages of growth. So as Rachel said, I grew up in California. I went to college to study politics, wandered into a course on religion, spirituality, and environmental values. It was a pretty classic Brown course, as some of you might expect, and really opened my eyes to different ways of seeing the world. As a kid who grew up in the suburbs, I hadn't really thought about the ways of Amazonian people and their relationship to the rainforest. So as a kid who was pretty curious, decided to take the summer and go down and live with some communities and open my eyes to a new way of living. Similarly, was fascinated by the traditions, the rituals, ultimately decided to then drop out of school for 2 years just to live and work down in the upper Amazon. I had a repeated experience where I'd spend all night with these healers doing ceremonies and just these incredible displays of feathers and smoke and plants and like what you imagine of Amazonian traditions. Just these millennial traditions being expressed today through these communities. But as soon as the sun would rise, you'd hear chainsaws cutting down hardwood trees. Same guys who were in the ceremony from the night before. And you talk to them and say, hey, you guys talk this big game about your plants and your family and your language and the importance of conserving this, but then you're ripping down trees to make money. And I'd always hear the same response, which was, if I have to choose between cutting down a tree and feeding my child, there's not a choice. If I had other ways to make money, I'd love to, but I don't want to move to an oil field and we have trees and the loggers come and buy it from us, so that's the story. So that shifted my thinking to look at how we could create new economic alternatives to generate more sustainable income for Native communities. And for them, the rainforest is their supermarket and their pharmacy. And there's tons of incredible plants that have never been commercialized. So one of the plants I fell in love with is this leaf, we call it a super leaf, called guayusa. And it's a leaf that isn't related to tea, but it's brewed like tea. The communities drink it at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's very high in caffeine, has about as much caffeine as coffee, and really rich in polyphenols, so it's a really nice sustained energy. And as someone who gets pretty jittery on coffee, I was surprised at how good it made me feel and realized it had never commercially been produced. It was just this thing that the native communities, the Quechua communities, drink in Ecuador. So long story short, went back to Brown, wrote a business plan with one of my best friends. I had a Fulbright grant to keep doing my research, but we decided that starting a business would be the most efficient and effective way to create impact for these communities in Ecuador. So moved down to Ecuador 2 days after graduating and got going. So we've literally built the entire supply chain from the ground up to the point when we got there and told farmers we wanted to sell this random leaf in New York City and bottled drinks, they just laughed their heads off, thinking it was a big joke, and then asked us if we wanted to buy corn or hardwood. So we started literally from the ground up, working with communities, governments, indigenous federations, building partnerships, and getting everything going. In the last, 4 years, we've scaled it to the point of supporting over 2,600 farming families in Ecuadorian Amazon. This year we'll generate about $400,000 of direct paid cash income with an additional $50,000 of fair trade premiums to the cooperatives. We've planted about 400,000 trees through the reforestation program. We have a nursery the size of a football field, the largest one in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and have scaled substantially. So we can talk about some of the things that have helped us get there. Then we had to launch our products, which is largely what we do now, because it's a business where we help farmers by selling product and generating impact. So our business model sits right on top of the impact model. So we knew nothing about consumer products, but at this point have built a beverage brand which is growing pretty successfully. We mostly sell bottled drinks. We brew the leaves and sell them as clean energy drinks. So 100% organic, all natural alternatives to Red Bull and whatnot. So we're in about 6,000 stores at this point. Sales are great, things are moving. So it's been exciting, but long road ahead of us to keep growing, and we're very much in that scaling phase. So I want to talk about 3 key things that I think are critical for making social enterprises work, and a couple stories of how we've thought about these pieces. So the first thing is the what. So as we talk about social enterprise, social business, a common trend that I've seen among a collective of social entrepreneurs is being very focused on the mission. And spending a lot of time, like we did early on, of got to think about impact reports and scaling this and spinning off that and all these big things we can do and all this amazing impact we can have. And I think in retrospect, we got a bit distracted, and I see this happen a fair bit where, especially in our case, we're incredibly mission-driven. Like, we do what we do because of our mission. But we need to run a successful business to make that work. And as we got more focused on making the financials work, making the business work, getting clear operations in service of the mission, we were much more successful. I think my first recommendation is always be mission-driven. That's your passion, that's what you do, but focus on the business. You know, as you're successful, as you make money, as it's all working, there's a lot of things you can do to generate more impact and more reporting and all sorts of stuff. But if you can't make it work, it's gonna fail. And I see people, like we did to a certain extent, getting a bit top-heavy with the mission and the vision and all the amazing things you could do. But if it's not working from a business point of view, if you're not scaling, you're not growing, you're not retaining people, finding good people, you know, that's it. So in the design phase, the two key filters, which we learned from our professor in school, which I use a lot, these come from Guy Kawasaki. The first one is the dramatic difference. So the biggest thing when I talk to people, whether it's a normal business or a social business, is be incredibly clear about what makes your service, product, organization dramatically different from what's currently out there. So not just a slight change, you know, repackaging something that's already out there, but what is wholly different about what you're doing. And especially if you're calling what you do a true social innovation, I think that's critical. So using that lens of knowing what's your dramatic difference and being able to articulate that will get you incredible support and is the platform for everything else that you do. Excuse me, got a little water. The second one, the second one is the real reason to believe. Some people might have heard of this. So in addition to this incredibly dramatically different thing that you're going to do, what's the real reason for someone to believe that you're going to do it and that it's going to work? So what's the credibility? What's the spark? What's the thing you can say that will let people know that, hey, this has some opportunity, this has some potency? So the dramatic difference, real reason to believe, the what. It's the critical component of whatever it is you're going to do. The second component is people. So as all of you know in organizations, people are key. I'm sure people have heard the saying that a lot of investors or donors will put money into an organization with a C business plan, but an A team, but would never put money into an organization that has an A business plan with the C team. So people are the key. I started Runa with one of my best friends. We started as actually a couple of friends who are all doing stuff. So we've been through the process of, you know, best friend from freshman year. At this point, we're 5 years into it, have had many fights of all sorts, but are doing pretty well. And at this point, I've actually been surprised when I have other friends who started a company by themselves come up to me and say, I'm so jealous. Like, why are you jealous? It's like, because you have a partner. Like, you have someone who you started this with who's like your compatriot, who you've been through the battles, you can bounce stuff off. And from my perspective, I'm like, man, having a partner is so hard. And you got to agree on stuff and find consensus and make things work. But over time, I'm a big believer in partnerships. I think especially if you're doing something innovative, something different, something new, if you're young, you're venturing into new territory, there's just so much insanity to figure out that having someone to walk that path with, whether it's one person, a few people, is incredibly helpful. And especially someone who you trust and can go through the dark times with means quite a lot. The other quick thing, if people are doing for-profit stuff, some great advice that we got early and we get asked a lot is like, how do you divide equity? If you're a business, how do you figure out who gets what? What's the story? The best advice we got from our professor was to find, it sounds kind of crazy, but quote, feel good numbers, which is the best advice. I mean, there's no scientific way to divide equity among founders. It's impossible. No one's ever created it. Every case is different. And the most important thing is that you find numbers that feel good. Because you're starting something that's going to last hopefully for a long time. And if you don't feel great and solid and clear and transparent about what the agreement is, you're planting a sickness in the seed of what you're going to grow. So that's critical. So let's quick on founders. The second is advisors. So I was a literary arts major in college. Dan was a marine bio major. So we were a marine bio major, a creative writing major who were going to build an entirely new supply chain in the Amazon and start a beverage company and compete with Red Bull. So as you can imagine, our real reason to believe wasn't particularly credible in the early days. So the first thing we did is we built an advisory board to give us first the expertise in the consumer packaged goods world, the supply chain world, the environmental innovation side, so that we had good people around us who had done this for a long time to make sure that we could stay caffeinated and work hard, but that we had good people around us. And our advisory board was critical. And we built that as the first thing that we did, and it was immensely helpful. The second reason it's helpful is not just for advice, the very practical side, but also for credibility. Because when we could, go to investor pitches, and so a slide that had guys from Pepsi and Stonyfield and all sorts of guys who quite experienced who were believing and betting on us, that amped our credibility 20-fold. So having advisory boards is incredibly helpful. The third piece is management. And Jane talked a bit about this earlier. So in my not extensive experience, I've come to see that I have a filter where I look at 3 buckets. So there's management, leadership, and entrepreneurship. And I think that it's awesome to find 2 of the 3 in a person, those capacities. It's really rare to find the 3. And I look back at people we've hired and as we've scaled and jobs have transitioned, and if you apply that filter, it's really easy to see kind of what we needed, where we grew, and how things changed, and where people's skill sets were. So I think as you're looking at key people, key pieces, it's really important to know, is this a job you need a manager, someone who's going to focus, get stuff done, do reports, keep people on task, or do you need someone who's more entrepreneurial? And those skill sets, it's pretty hard to find someone, in many cases, who can do both. So we had this guy, Fausto, who was amazing. He was our first director in Napo, which is the province where we work in Ecuador. Really innovative, incredibly energetic. He built a whole platform in Napo, scaled it up, hired technical staff, the whole deal. As soon as we became more organizational and started having more, great, we got our team, things are working, let's focus, let's get stuff done, he was horrible, just totally horrible. And we're like, why isn't this working? It's Fausto, he's been incredible. But in retrospect, he was a good leader, he was strong, he was very entrepreneurial, very resourceful, but he was a terrible manager. So at that point we said, great, that works. We took out Fausto and brought in someone who knew how to manage. So I think that framework for management has been really helpful for me. And then the last piece is staff. Another lens I look at is the show horses versus work horses lens, which I found to be helpful. In the States, we're a team of about 24. The average age is 25. We're a very young team. And we do sales and marketing and are sharing product all the time. So it's great. We're super energetic and have an awesome time. I think working with millennials is tough, really tough. And as someone who came out of college and did stuff, it's really hard for me to say this, but especially young people in their 20s, everyone wants to be the creative, right? Everyone wants to have their voice, their excitement, which is amazing. And I think we're a really strong organization because we have tons of voices at the table. But I think in a lot of cases we've learned that, and it's a social enterprise and our values and our mission, and everyone's involved. That's great to a certain extent, but in certain cases we need workhorses. We need people who are going to focus, get the job done, not get distracted, not throw out opinions all the time, but just get stuff done. And if you're trying to scale an organization and make it work, I think that's critical. So those are my 4 things on people. I'm just going to check the time to see how we're doing. Okay. The next key piece is how. How do you get it done? And the number 1 thing is money. It's all about money if you're trying to do something. I'm sure that's not new news. So I had a couple fundraising tips. At this point, we've raised money from private investors of every type, institutional, angels, friends, grandmas. We got a $500,000 investment from the Ecuadorian government. We actually got the national government of Ecuador to put $500,000 in our subsidiary. Through our nonprofit Runa Foundation, we've gotten private donations, government grants, multilateral, the whole deal. So we have a pretty good breadth of what we see in fundraising. So the first tip is super simple. Have good materials. I think as we started to really sharpen our deck, our presentations, our financials, and everything looked sharp and serious, it was shocking how much that helped. And even if you're trying to figure something out and don't really know, if your stuff looks good, it's worth it. It's worth spending some money on a designer, get the right logo, get the right presentation, totally worth every cent. You'll pay for it. The second is know your numbers. I found that both investors and donors, if they sit down with a CEO, a manager, an executive director who knows their numbers by heart, can talk through their profit and loss, numbers, this, that, where this money's going, percentage of budgets, how that's transforming, it's impressive. If you're someone who's like, oh, well, let me look at the Excel, let me call my CFO, I'll get back to you on that. They want to know that you're thinking about this stuff constantly, and you know exactly where the business is, top line, bottom line, the full deal. And that's their confidence that you're living this, you're breathing this, you get it, you know what's working, know what's not working. So knowing your numbers cold, I think, is really helpful. Not just the high-level stuff, but the details as well. The third piece of it is what I call the fake it till you make it strategy. which we've employed, I think, to the brim of what's acceptable. And I think it's the sort of thing where if you're really trying to innovate and make stuff work, you got to know how to storytell. Your number one job as a leader, an executive director, CEO is your storytelling. That's your job. And you have to know how to strategically craft every bit of your message for the right audience, the right stakeholder. So example of what we do is we have a humongous reforestation program. So if we're talking to our our nonprofit side and the stuff we do through the nonprofit, we put on the hat of reforesting native Amazonian species, protecting biodiversity, building land use buffer zones around the most mega diverse rainforest in the world, providing future resources for native communities, protecting the forest gardening traditions of Quechua people, like check, nonprofit, impact. Same exact program, put on the other hat. We are ensuring future supply for our products. We're building additional production, diversifying production resources, same exact thing, but just told through a for-profit lens. And we kind of structure it different ways. So I think it's useful to know how you can talk about the different things you're doing for the different stakeholders that are involved, but staying true to the exact same process of it. Yeah, and the last thing was, so the other thing too that I know there's a lot of conversation in the entrepreneurial world around work-life balance, which is something I'm trying to learn and have gotten better at. It's really hard for me to get around the idea of hustling, in the sense that, I look at, the years we lived in Ecuador and just like night and day, drank insane amounts of guayusa and just like worked nonstop and slept on buses and the whole deal. And I can't imagine we would have gotten to where we've gotten if we didn't do that. And, at this point we're a bit more mature, and I think I've learned that as we're more organizational, there's only so hard I can push, because it's not just me and Dan, it's like a whole group of people, and I have to be a lot more wise around how I push and when I push and all that good stuff. But early on, I think it's pretty hard to trade just like sweat. Just like put in the hours, working hard. And even for us, like, it took us a while to get traction, but just the process of like spinning the wheel until like it got a little bit of traction made us like committed, it made us focused, it made us figure out how to make things work. And I think for any of this process, just the like going for it full speed, putting in your heart, your time, it's pretty hard to exchange for that. And there's smarter ways to do things and all that, which is also important, but I think I'm a big fan of just going for it. Yeah, the other last thing, just to wrap up. So we're also embarking on new territories through Runa Foundation and going for it in other directions. The big question we've asked with Runa is how can we prove the value of the Amazon in today's world? So we're looking at the question of value. How can we internationally value these resources and traditions? So our newest project, we're building a health clinic in the Peruvian Amazon to integrate Amazonian plant medicine with Western medicine. So to build the first clinic in the world that's actually clinically practicing and researching these plant medicines to treat chronic disease alongside Western doctors and psychiatrists. So totally new, we know nothing about health, but could be the most potent way we could really crack this to really validate the efficacy of these plants for treating chronic disease. So I also put that out because my last piece of advice is you got to talk to tons of people and ask for help. So we're moving pretty quickly with that project, and I know a lot of people here involved in health, so it's me asking for help. If anyone has resources, ideas, interest in anything like that, please let me know. So thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.